Hey everyone, welcome back to the hardware news recap of the week. It's been an awesome week. We launched the website, did some other cool stuff we're really excited about, but it's also been a heavy week for hardware news. NVIDIA might be forced to cancel $5 billion in orders for GPUs that were intended to go to China. EK Waterblocks has launched the most monstrous distro plate we've ever seen. And Intel has announced an announcement. It's Meteor Lake related. And given the Apple M3 news, probably that's timely for Intel. Modern Warfare 3 also will apparently be able to run on dual-core CPUs. It has some interesting minimum requirement specs they've listed. And then on the Arc GPU side, 750% uplift for Halo. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and the CryoSheet graphene pads. These CryoSheets are molecularly stacked in the Z-axis to encourage vertical direct thermal transfer from the IHS to the cooler. CryoSheet pads are made to be easily applicable for a thermal interface and completely avoid paste dryout because it's not paste. It makes them particularly useful for long service life systems with minimal maintenance. They come in multiple sizes for suitability on the most common laptops and desktop CPUs, and you can learn more at the Thermal Grizzly CryoSheets at the link in the description below. So a quick one to catch you up on news we're just really excited about. This is actually the most excited I've been for a GN-related project for a while. It's been awesome to work on. But this past week, we relaunched our website with full in-depth written content, and there's no pagination, so you don't have to click through 37 pages to see one chart per page, and it is ad-free. We have promos for our Patreon page and for our GN store, like the last one you just heard, but we're not running a single Google AdSense ad. We're not running a directly sold banner ad. We're not running autoplay video ads in there. And that makes the website a lot slimmer and faster and leaner, which from just a navigational standpoint has been nice internally. It's quick, and that's a big upside. Personally, at least, websites, written content used to be the main thing, obviously, for all industries, but tech in particular had a really strong and healthy written content sector. It's where I started in the industry in 2008. And long before me, there were a lot of sort of founders of the tech reporting scene who many of them have at this point retired or moved to work for companies, things like that. And unfortunately, a lot of the websites were kind of left when they left to go do their new gigs. So it's been a little while since we've been in the written space as well, and we've been excited to move back over to it. Between the YouTube revenue mostly, that's really what's going to support this effort. Long-standing affiliate revenue, support from Patreon, and especially from GN Store. Those things will be enough where we don't need ads on the website too. Just having the sort of YouTube presence will be enough to carry everything. And I don't need to maximize every dollar out of everything I do. So that's the plan for the site. And on the publication side, we're going to run about a 1-week cadence for most of you. Sometimes we might be sooner, but it'll hit video first. That's part of the sort of funding the effort thing where we need to get it on YouTube first, and then it'll go to the site. Maybe sometimes we'll hit a 3-day cadence, but for the most part, we're expecting about 1 week later we'll be running the written review, and then it's just there forever for you. We made a whole video about this already, so I'm not going to rehash the whole thing, but you should check out the full story behind this. The short of it is that I started working on the site 2007. I launched it 2008. 2012 or so, switched over switched over to YouTube. About 2015, 2016, started pushing YouTube pretty hard, but also made it impossible to physically to keep up. So we've built solutions with the website now that will make that possible. We have expanded the team. Everybody's trained on how to enter articles, so it's good. We're pretty excited about it. But the number one person I have to thank here is Wendell from Level 1 Techs and Krista on his team. They have been enormously patient with me because I think Wendell wanted to work on this project with us probably about a year ago now. I announced intent to redesign the site several years ago, and he has had a lot of patience as he's had to drag me forward from ancient web article entry technology that's like 15 years old now and teach me how the world works today for her website. So thank you, Wendell. Level 1 Techs, if you don't know their channel, you should check it out. Anyway, first and foremost, a sentimental project. It's where I started. I wanted to get back to it, but make it better than ever. Secondly, some community service here. We know YouTube doesn't make it particularly easy to surface videos as they age. Patrick on the team has sort of struggled with that with some of the case reviews, where he wants to go look at what he's said for older cases when we're working on new case reviews, and having only video can sometimes make that challenging. So this will help with the searchability of stuff. And likewise, we know it's a pain to crawl for charts that are somewhere in a 36-minute video like a year later when you barely remember the content, but you need a reference point for your card, so it helps there too. So the closeout message for this section before we get to the news is that this is something that we promised years and years ago. I said I wanted to work on a website rework, I think in 2018 or 19. And yes, even before the fan tester. So this was this was an ambition from a long time ago. We finally delivered on it. We have other large ambitions we still want to get to and work on and stuff, but we're starting to execute one by one on the big projects that we've been talking about for years, and been doing pretty well with it lately. So fan tester's on the list, of course, but before we do that one, we're probably rehashing our ATX case test review suite. That system is from 2016, I think. So that's getting rebuilt right now. Cooler tests are getting fully rebuilt refactors, and then it's everything else. So if you want to see the site, go to GamersNexus.net. You can get an ad-free reviews experience. Up first, new BIOS updates for AMD X670 and X670E motherboards, spotted originally by Andreas Schilling on Twitter, indicate support for AMD's Phoenix family of APUs. The BIOS update will include the AGESA 1.1.0.0 update as well. This was in a BIOS posted by ASUS where you can see support for the PHX or Phoenix family of APUs. AMD has two variations of Phoenix solutions for notebooks. There's Phoenix and there's Phoenix 2, with Phoenix 2 being the smaller die. Currently, Tom's Hardware seems to believe that the inbound desktop APUs will run on Phoenix, sans the 2. Meanwhile, Video Cards indicates it believes a Ryzen 5 7500G and Ryzen 3 7300G set of APUs might run on Phoenix 2, with potential for a larger Phoenix APU die later. Either way, there's openings for both Phoenix and Phoenix 2 to be used in desktop APUs. Both of these would include a move to newer AMD architectures, because AMD hasn't updated its APU desktop components in a meaningful way since the Ryzen 5600G and 5700G APUs. AMD's APUs are normally useful for ultra-cheap builds that are technically capable of gaming, even if the game's selection is more restricted to less visually demanding titles, like Baldur's Gate as a recent good example of something that's highly playable across the board, and with a sufficient APU, it might get by without a DGPU. Up next, NVIDIA, one of the wealthiest and most in-demand companies in the world at this point, might have to cancel $5 billion worth of orders for 2024 that had already been allocated to Chinese tech companies like Alibaba, ByteDance, and Baidu. At least that's if it can't get the US government to give it exceptions to rules that were pulled forward. This comes as a follow-up story to the one we ran a couple weeks ago regarding the US government clamping down and imposing some trade restrictions. So you get the baseline from a couple weeks ago. Again, reminder, as a policy, we don't comment on the political side of this. We're going to focus on the news from the tech side and just strictly what's happening. So the trade restrictions against NVIDIA were set to go into effect in the middle of November, and NVIDIA was doing its best to claw forward some orders for next year into this year before those restrictions went into effect. The goal being get them out the door before they're not able to legally do so, at least not without exceptions to the rule. And doing this, well, it would have worked, except the curtain fell a little bit early. Last week, the US government sent NVIDIA a letter updating the company with news that the restrictions now apply immediately. That means NVIDIA is forced to freeze all of its efforts to ship A800 and H800 chips to its China-based buyers. Those are the models that NVIDIA modified to comply with the previous restrictions that banned the export of full A100 and H100 parts. The new rules also apply to NVIDIA's L40S processor, which, as we understand it, is tuned for generative AI inference rather than training. The only way NVIDIA can sell any of them is by obtaining export licenses from the US Commerce Department on a case-by-case basis. A spokesperson from NVIDIA stated that, quote, "These new export controls will not have a meaningful impact in the near term." However, the company's CFO warned of long-term impact if the restrictions were tightened permanently, and this was stated back in August. As of now, those restrictions have been tightened. Quote, over the long term, restrictions prohibiting the sale of our data center GPUs to China, if implemented, will result in a permanent loss of an opportunity for the US industry to compete and lead one of the world's largest markets. Considering how absurdly high the demand for NVIDIA's data center compute products like these are, we're sure the company will find other buyers quickly. But cutting into that demand pool is never desirable, because you never know when a customer might evaporate and you need another one to take the place. Whether or not there will be buyers, a $5 billion disruption to cash flow is huge for a company of any size, even NVIDIA's. We mentioned Baldur's Gate 3 in the AMD APU story, and that game actually just recently pushed a massive update that introduced FSR 2.2. Baldur's Gate included FSR 1.0 at launch, although we didn't need to use it in our GPU benchmarking because the game plays unbelievably well on nearly every GPU we tested on. It's highly scalable across older hardware already, but FSR 2.2 presence might help for people who are playing on even older hardware than we tested on low-end IGPs, or maybe in handhelds like the Steam Deck or the Ally. FSR 2 would prove useful here. Our original testing of the Ally non-extreme found that, despite generally high playability on older DGPUs, we still had to make significant compromises on handheld gaming PCs, and FSR 2 would have helped there. Larian posted its patch notes for Baldur's Gate 3, stating that they've launched over 1,000 fixes and changes for the game in the latest set of updates. This includes everything from more function-first changes like accessibility settings for the colorblind to more gaming-specific changes like Scratch's ball being easier to reclaim, along with a cheeky note about ball warranties being voided for chasm-related accidents in true D&D humor fashion. The team made changes to combat animations, gameplay, and performance via things like FSR and others. More critically, they noted resolution for several game crash, freeze, and progression blocking events. These include GPU-related crashes, crashes on certain game logic checks, and crashes when switching input devices, and more. The controller and split screen section also included a huge amount of changes that may benefit those of you playing locally, and the Baldur's Gate team continues to prove why its launch should set the tone for future game launches in a season full of buggy and poorly optimized rushed releases. Hopefully this serves as an internal marker for developers to say, we want to launch like Baldur's Gate 3, not like Cities Skylines 2. This is a pretty short one. Intel will be hosting an event titled, AI Everywhere. That's nice and creepy and dystopian. No one in PR was given the chance to review that titling. Anyway, the AI Everywhere event, subtitle pending, we're expecting We're Watching You. And no, I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Dave. December 14th, 10 a.m. There's a Dave somewhere in the audience who just looked up. 10 a.m. will be this AI Everywhere event, and Intel will be introducing its 5th gen Xeon CPUs, and more importantly to our audience, the Core Ultra line, this one for mobile CPUs codenamed Meteor Lake. These aren't desktop CPUs, but they represent a shift in Intel's architecture, and definitely this announcement, although interesting for all of us, is probably more focused on people who are watching Apple right now. These CPUs should top out at only 6 P-cores, but they have Intel's new VPU for hardware acceleration of AI tasks. And we'll kind of see how they market it, because there's differing levels of load for AI processing, and this is going to be on the lower end. But it's something that Microsoft's been pushing a lot lately, this idea of we need hardware that does AI accelerated things that can integrate cleanly with Windows. It's something we reported on last week for the ARM CPUs. There's not any more information than this at this time. Activision has released PC requirements for its Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, the second 2, Part 1, which is coming out soon. That includes the apparent fact that the game can run on a dual-core CPU and 2 GB VRAM GPU from 2015. It's crazy low for a AAA game in 2023. Diving into Modern Warfare 3's requirements shows 4 total sets of specs. Looking at the image, there are 2 sets of minimum requirements. That means the developer is drawing a line between playable in smaller multiplayer maps versus playable in the larger and more elaborate single-player campaign maps with AI NPCs running around. That absolute lowest spec we just mentioned is under the minimum multiplayer-only column. It calls for an Intel i3 6100 or an AMD R3 1200. Both by today's standards are incredibly low-end CPUs. They were just low-end at one point. But the i3 6100, as a reminder, is a dual-core with hyper-threading running at 3.7 gigahertz. The R3 1200 is a quad-core without SMT at 3.4 gigahertz. This is actually really interesting, as off the top of our heads, we can't think of the last time another big game claimed to work on a CPU with only 2 cores. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, for example, lists like 4460 as its minimum for 1080p 30 FPS. Looking back at Modern Warfare 2's requirements, it shows that the only difference between that and this is dropping the ancient but venerable i5 2500K from that list. That tells us the new game shouldn't be appreciably more demanding on CPU than the old one, but it's still surprising nonetheless. Other multiplayer minimum requirements include 8 gigabytes of system RAM, 79 gigabytes of SSD space, hard drives need not apply here, and at least an NVIDIA GTX 960, 1650, or AMD RX 470. COD specifies a minimum of 2 gigabytes of VRAM here, and that's the part that's interesting, because considering how regularly we as an industry now talk about whether or not 8 gigabytes is enough for modern games, 2 gigabytes is certainly far below that. Activision doesn't say what resolution and frame rate these specs target, but regardless, this should be an indicator that the game will scale down to a wide range of older hardware. That said, we've recently been re-disillusioned by minimum requirements that publishers post. Cities Skylines 2 had some of the worst performance we've ever seen, and the minimum GTX 970 ran at this blazing fast and extremely fun frame rate. The other set of specs from there are higher, so true minimum ups the CPU to quad core, and recommended specs call for an i7 6700K or R5 1600X with a 1080 Ti, 3060, or 6600 XT. Competitive 4K Ultra specs are of course even higher. One weird thing not really related to the specs is the high-res REZ asset cache. Not the fact that it exists, but the name itself. High-res is the trademarked name of the game publisher and developer most known for Smite and Tribes Ascend, though now unlisted on Steam. And we'd postulate that maybe Activision is attempting to make new friends for its lawyers by acquainting them with high-reses. Activision has owned so many things at this point. Maybe there's a bond there already. Maybe they already know each other. Anyway, we're going to look into Modern Warfare 3 for benchmarks, so let us know down in the comments if you'd be interested in GPU and CPU testing. It's not 100% confirmed right now that we're going to do anything with it. We're looking at it. So it's one of those, we're going to launch it, see how it looks from an ease of testing standpoint, gauge the community interest, and if those things line up, if it's very difficult to test, but there's high community interest, then we'll do it. And the inverse, you could guess, the approach. So anyway, we'll try to look at it, but let us know what you think if you care about the game. And which of the two you'd rather see, CPU or GPU testing. Up next, EK launches this crazy distro plate. It's called the EK Quantum X loophole. Normally, distro plates are intended to offer a degree of simplicity in terms of loop planning. This one, however, pushes it back towards complexity as far as possible. EK intends for the user to run tubing, complete with fittings, inside the distro plate itself to create their own entirely customized routing. If that sounds crazy, that's because it is. One entire face of the distro plate is Swiss cheesed with a total of 34 G1/4 threaded holes, both inside and out. Externally, they serve to allow for tons of flexibility in where the tubing that comes from all the blocks and radiators can attach to the distro. Internally is where it starts to get unorthodox. Unlike most distro plates that have pre-cut channels to direct the flow of water between the exterior ports, the interior of the loophole is almost entirely one open plenum. Inside of that space, the user can have any number of loop-back tubing runs to direct the flow of water into and then straight back out of the distro plate without ever actually flowing through the distro plate. So Jay, like Jay's 2 cents, I'm talking to you right now. Please, hopefully he hears about this. I'll text him, let him know I have a message for him. Jay, please, we need you to build a PC4 exhibit to complete the meme. It's the physical manifestation of, yo dog, we heard you like water cooling, so we water cooled your water cooling. Please do it. We need it. Internally, there's only 22 millimeters of space between the thread hole surface and the inner lid surface, meaning only the lowest profile fittings on the market, like EK's Quantum Torque micro fittings, will work. Now the catch is mainly the price tag. It's nearly $500, but also EK doesn't include any of the required internal fittings. EK does include 32 stop fittings for unused exterior ports, and it comes in either black or silver, and EK says it should be shipping sometime in December. Although kind of crazy and different, that's also why it's cool. So this will probably pop up in show floor pieces at CES or Computex, where modders build cool things. Next one, Bethesda. So shout out to Adam from PC World for giving us a heads up on this story, and he'll soon have a video. I just joined Adam and Gordon to do a video for their channel, so you should check that out. It was a fun podcast talk. But Adam gave me a heads up to this story. Bethesda Game Studios tweeted that Starfield will be getting DLSS, something it promised just after launch, and it's going to get FSR3. Now, as a reminder, we previously tested DLSS in Starfield, but it was via a user mod, actually 2 different ones, that were implemented within a few days of launch. Bethesda will be officially adding it to the game now, and AMD FSR3 was also a curious one at launch because the game was an AMD partner, and it would have been a perfect launch partner for FSR3, but either Bethesda or AMD, we're not sure which, wasn't ready to pair the two for initial launch. Bethesda asked its customers to beta test the performance patch, and it tweeted this, quote, "We've been hard at work on Starfield updates, and we'll be putting our next one into Steam beta next week. This update will feature NVIDIA DLSS support with frame generation, display and HDR controls for supported systems, and other optimizations and improvements. You'll be able to opt in to try it via the Steam beta options. We'd love your feedback before it goes live for all PC and Xbox players after that. Stay tuned for the specifics soon, and thanks for playing." It then followed up the tweet with a second one that simply stated, "Note that DLSS is for PC NVIDIA users only. We'll also have AMD FSR3 support in a future update." So the takeaway here is that FSR3 and the DLSS implementation officially probably won't launch at the same time. FSR3 is going to be after that. There's not much point to looking at the DLSS implementation in a benchmark because we've already tested that. Maybe if something crazy happens, we'll look at it, but no plans right now because we already did that testing with the mods. And you can watch our Starfield graphics optimization coverage for that. FSR3, though, we do want to test that specifically in Starfield because, what is the name of the game? Forspoken, that was it. That was the game that FSR3 launched with. We need something that people care about in at least a somewhat positive way. So Starfield will be a good candidate. Up next, Intel has posted some ARC GPU drivers to its downloads page, and the new driver version is 4952. Intel's been keeping pace with posting continual updates here. This time it makes a number of matter-of-fact claims about uplift in a couple of different games. Most of them are DX11. And in the past, Intel's Tom Peterson, who used to be NVIDIA's Tom Peterson, has stated it would be, quote, "a labor of love" to get DirectX 11 support fully operational basically within ARC going forward. And it appears that they have remained true to maintaining that laborious process. So the update list includes these titles: Guild Wars 2 at 53% uplift at 1080p Ultra, Halo, the Master Chief Collection at 750%, which must mean it was just straight up broken before, Civ 5 at 6%, Lost Ark at 15%, Vermintide 2 at 16%, Sniper Elite 3 saw a 37% uplift, World War Z got 113% uplift, Euro Truck Simulator 2 got 27%, Yakuza 0 got 154%, COD Infinite Warfare was 20% boost, Alien Isolation at 9%, and then there were a couple Far Cries in here at 14%, and then New Dawn at 11%. Intel has been continuing to post major improvements to its ARC drivers. Back when we first reviewed Intel's ARC GPUs, we ran a follow-up piece that reported over 40 bugs with the driver package. Intel posted a blog post following this, acknowledging the video and immediately making plans to rectify the issues. In the time since, it has made massive and effective efforts to overhaul its performance and its game compatibility. So the biggest update initially was that DX9 update, where Intel unbroke the performance in a number of actually relevant games like Counter-Strike Go at the time, as pre-CS2. That was a huge update. They smoothed out a lot of the frame pacing issues that we talked about in our original review coverage. And the compatibility, that's probably still its biggest weak point, where it's like if it doesn't work, there's actually nothing you can do about it. So there was no official Starfield support at launch. The support that came was not particularly strong originally. They've been working on patching that. And then we had issues with City Skylines 2. There's a patch that says it introduced support for it, but we were having crashing issues on Intel specifically. Didn't have any of those problems on AMD or NVIDIA, although the game itself is certainly not free of its own bugs. So Intel still got that issue to contend with, but from a performance standpoint, they've been doing a lot with their drivers to improve them. All right, last week we reported on Microsoft's encouraging the likes of Qualcomm, NVIDIA, and AMD to make ARM-based CPUs for Windows desktops and laptops, but especially notebooks. And immediately after this news broke, Apple hosted its official M3 announcement. So Apple posted its M3, M3 Pro, and M3 Max silicon announcement. Critical changes include introduction of mesh shading and hardware-accelerated ray tracing, introducing features that modern desktop GPUs have had for a while now. Apple stated this of its dynamic caching solution, quote, "It features dynamic caching that, unlike traditional GPUs, allocates the use of local memory and hardware in real time. With dynamic caching, only the exact amount of memory needed is used for each task." As for pricing, the company introduced its three M3 solutions ranging from $1,300 to $1,700 for the starting price. These are configurable, so if we go ahead and click on the $1,700 one, the most offensive part of this to us is the memory capacity. $1,700 for the iMac with 512 gigabytes of storage and 8 gigabytes of RAM. This is actually insane to get away with shipping for that price, especially because NAND and DRAM prices have been plummeting lately, with a decent 2 terabyte SSD available from a name brand for around or under $100 right now. Adding 8 gigabytes to this system, so you get a total of 16 gigabytes of memory, costs an extra $200. So, insano land, Apple pricing, still around. If you want some entertainment, you can click on those customized buttons, look at some of the specs that you get for the pricing. Pretty sure everyone's familiar that this is just how they do their prices these days. But those announcements, nonetheless, are going to drive a lot of the talking points from companies like Intel, especially because they got kind of bashed here by Apple in the keynote, and then Qualcomm, NVIDIA, and ARM, and of course Microsoft. So Microsoft assembling an Avengers to try and battle Apple, which is going to make the space really interesting in the next couple of years. That's it for hardware news. Thank you for watching. As always, go to store.gamersnexus.net to grab one of our new Gienna emblem glasses. And you can also go to GamersNexus.net to just check out the new website. It's pretty cool. We're excited about it. Subscribe for more. We'll see you all next time.